One summer I decided to spend part of my vacation in the country with relatives. I did not want to spend money on Turkey and Egypt, so I decided to relax in a simple way. I liked everything in the village, a sea of greenery, a river nearby, fresh air and other simple pleasures. On Saturday, my second cousin Carl, the local veterinarian, had a day off, and he suggested that I go to the forest for berries, like most villagers. Carl was fond of home brewing and decided to try the recipe on a strawberry stand. Buying berries was unacceptable for him, as he liked to participate in the process from beginning to end. In the end, why then go fishing if you can buy fish in a store? It was great sunny weather. There was not much to do, and so I gladly accepted their offer. We had to go far across the river because, according to Carl, all the berries had already been collected in the nearby glades. We walked for about 2 hours. You could, of course, take the train, but she traveled quite rarely. Finally, we reached a small grove where mostly fir trees grew. There were really a lot of strawberries there. Just have time to collect. For about an hour we wandered through the copse, reaching its edge. Then the trees ended and the mowing began. A small bow where grass was extinguished and hay was harvested. And it was a deaf and deserted place from two edges, surrounded by rare trees. There was a country road on the side, but, as Carl said, no one was driving on it now. Since the small bridge to which it led was destroyed, it was assumed that we would cross the mowing. Then along the country road we would reach the train and return home on it. We decided to take a break from picking berries and have a little snack. The mowing was flooded with the scorching sun, so we settled in the shade between rare loafer trees. The whole bow was visible at a glance. Suddenly, some sounds were heard in the distance. It was like the roar of an engine pulling up a car, looking out from behind the trees. We really saw someone coming towards us, rolling over on potholes and raising dust. A cargo gazelle drove up to the mowing and stopped. We did not stick out from behind the trees and watched what was happening through the branches. 2 men in tracksuits got out of the car, 35 to 40 years old, but of an ordinary appearance and unremarkable. I remember that one of them was bald and the other red. They looked around and talked about something, but it was impossible to make out the speech because of the distance. Then they opened the back door and began to pull something out of the gazelle. It looked like a red oblong box, which they carefully placed on the ground. Then the bald man climbed into the gazelle again and pulled out strange sticks and an axe. Sitting on a red box with his back to us, he began to fiddle with sticks and an axe. As if preparing firewood for a fire, the other man walked briskly, called on the phone and laughed. In general, everything looked somehow incomprehensible and strange. We decided not to go out yet and see what they're up to. You couldn't see us behind the branches. About 5 minutes later, in the distance, the sound of a moving car was heard again. Indeed, a Land Cruiser appeared from behind the trees at the sight of him. The 2 peasants perked up and waved their hands. Finally, the car pulled up and stopped. The doors slammed, and the guys climbed out of the back seats, beefy burly men of about 25. The driver got out of the front seat, thin but also strong. He was older, about 40 years old, and I remember that he had a mustache. They were all dressed the same, black shirts, jeans, black shoes. Types in tracksuits approached them and began to shake hands. They were talking about something, but we couldn't hear what. Then one of the big guys opened the door again, climbed up to the waist into the salon and began to fiddle vigorously there. Suddenly, the head of a man appeared from the salon. After a few seconds of fuss, the guy pulled the stubborn old man out of the car with a curse. That old man, apparently, clearly did not want to go out and resisted in every possible way. Finally, the guy with the red face dragged him outside. He grabbed his clothes tightly and jerked him towards the mustachioed man. The matter was taking a serious turn, and we were agitated. It was not clear what was going on here. We unwittingly became witnesses of something illegal. The old man was over 70 years old. He was in ordinary village clothes, of a frail build, with gray hair and a wrinkled face. The mustachioed looked at him hostilely and, apparently, was asking something sternly. Folding his arms over his chest, grandfather excitedly and ardently justified himself. At some point, the old man attempted to escape. Wobbling and stumbling, he ran towards the trees. But he didn't get far. One of the guys quickly caught up with him, knocked him down and, taking him by the scruff of the neck, dragged him to the opposite place. The old man was given a couple of slaps in the face and his arms were twisted behind his back. The mustachioed shook his head contemptuously and muttered something through his teeth. Then the mustachioed one went up to the bald one, who was still sitting on the oblong box. The bald man showed him some kind of cross made up of two sticks, apparently tied with a rope. The lower end of the vertical stick was sharpened with an axe. The mustachioed touched the sharp end with his hand, nodding his head approvingly and saying something. Seeing the cross, the old man began to bawl. They say, "Help!" It was clear and distinct. The mustachioed man, putting the cross on the ground, took out some kind of rag from his pocket, went up to the old man from behind and roughly bandaged his mouth. The screams became less audible, but the old man did not stop screaming and began to kick. One of the big men knocked him down with a sweep, burying his nose in the ground. Mustachio took out a coil of rope from the car, and they began to tie the old man's hands behind his back and his legs. Then the bald man opened the lid of the red oblong box. There was some kind of symbol depicted on the lid, and looking closer, I saw that it was a cross. And then it dawned on me that this box is nothing but a coffin. There was another incomprehensible hole in the lid of the coffin at chest level. The old man, meanwhile, was twitching all over, panicking and screaming through the rag. The guys and the mustachioed man grabbed the writhing old man by the arms and legs, lifted him up and dragged him to the coffin, having thrown it there. They slammed the lid on some metal latches and caught their breath for a while. As if spellbound, I watched all this and did not notice how sweat was pouring down my face. Carl looked at me with bewildered eyes and pressed his finger to his lips, signaling me to be silent. Pale and agitated, we looked on. After all this, the mustachio took the wooden cross from the bald one and began to do something with it. It seemed that he was sticking some paper stickers on him, brought from the car. Then he went to the coffin and sat on top of it, placing the cross with its pointed end near the hole in the lid. From the coffin came the invited cries of the old man. For a while, the mustachioed man sat with his eyes closed and, judging by the movement of his lips, whispered something. Finally, he swung with force and drove the cross into the hole. There was a loud thud and a long groan from the old man. No more sounds came from the coffin. After sitting motionless for a few more seconds, the mustachioed man got up and walked over to the rest of the company gathered at the car. He was saying something to them, patting the big guys on the shoulder. The bald man took out a pack of cigarettes, distributed them to others, and they all lit up, except for the mustachioed one. He took out a bottle of mineral water from the salon and began to drink greedily from his throat. Closing the bottle, he threw it into the car and, leaning against the trunk, looked thoughtfully at the coffin, in which the cross still stuck out. Then I heard some sounds resembling rhythmic tapping coming from the coffin. The sounds were clearly getting louder and clearer. The mustachioed man abruptly commanded the others, and they immediately threw away their half-smoked cigarettes. Meanwhile, the knocking from inside the coffin grew stronger. It turned into powerful blows, as if from the inside a wooden lid was being beaten with a hammer. The coffin began to bounce. Dust was visible flying up and metal latches clanged. The whole company immediately ran up to the coffin and fell on it from different sides. The mustachioed man grabbed the cross and tried to hold it. Terrible sounds resembled ramming on wooden gates, now some growls. Gnashing and howling began to be added to the knocks. It sounded just terrible and resembled a pack of wild animals, as if from within something was scratching with huge claws. From under the lid came smoke, reminiscent of a viscous fog. The coffin just swayed from side to side. The men with distorted faces held the coffin with all their might. Everyone looked scared and excited. The mustache was bleeding from his nose. This bacchanalia lasted 5 minutes. All this time we sat under the trees with eyes round with horror. My heart was pounding and sweat was pouring out, gradually. The blows to the coffin became less frequent, and then stopped altogether. The frantic screams behind the lid merged into one scream. That seemed to go into agony and stop in a death rattle. Finally, everything calmed down, and the coffin stopped moving. The men got up, breathing heavily and wiping the sweat from their faces. Mustachioed was led under the arms to the car and helped to rinse his face from the blood. For some time, they walked near the car, listlessly exchanging phrases. Then, apparently, they were about to leave. The mustachioed man went up to the coffin and pulled the cross out of the hole. The end of the stick was smeared with something black and dirty and smoking, but it didn't look like blood. Then the coffin was imprisoned in a gazelle, and a cross was thrown there after that. Everyone got into their cars and drove away, leaving behind clouds of dust. We, dazed and shocked by all this, lay under the trees for another half an hour. Coming to our senses and collecting our thoughts, everything we saw shocked us to the core. Then, discussing what we saw, we decided that all this was somehow connected with evil spirits and witchcraft. We quickly walked away from this strange place on a country road. We reached the train and safely reached the house. We had no desire to talk about this incident. On the contrary, we wanted to forget this nightmare.